I was telling our remarkable MC who didn't know he was the MC until he told him himself that when I was 15 years old, I was a magician. I actually won second place at the International Battle of Magicians when I was 15 years old. But I've forgotten everything I knew. Otherwise, we would have some kind of competition. So I'm really, really happy to be here. But I have to tell you, I'm going to have to begin with a confession. And there are probably lots of confessions in this room, especially after listening to this, my schedule is too full kind of thing. And I'm sitting here knowing I was in Rome like 3 days ago, and I was with Lorna in Toronto like 2 days after that. And, I have a 2-year-old and a 7-month-old. And I don't need to speak here at all. I feel totally overwhelmed with my life right now. But that's not the confession that I want to make. Now I'm going to make another confession. Maybe there's a CEO of a counseling practice in here. Actually, that'd be nice. Here's my confession. And actually, this confession might disqualify me from talking at all, okay? And if that's the case, I will just walk off this stage and straight to my car. And here it is. I'm a millennial. Yeah, and the scariest thing you've ever heard in your life is what I'm about to tell you. And that is that there are 80 million of us, okay? 80 million of us born after 1980. We are the generation that once voted Lady Gaga the person of the year. So of all the people in the world, all the world leaders, you would think we could have at least thought of like Nelson Mandela or something, right? Instead, we thought of Lady Gaga, okay? So that's the hallmark of my generation. We actually convinced the President of the United States to allow us to come back on your insurance so we could move back in with you. So, this is really, really cool. So that just as soon as you thought your nest was empty, just after you had spent your nest egg on sending us to college so we could learn something called digital media, we moved back in with you. That's my generation. They say the millennials value influence over affluence, right? It sounds very philosophical. Influence over affluence. We don't want to work for a living. We want to work for meaning. We refuse to work without meaning. We're also the most unemployed generation in America. This is the greatest miracle of tonight is that I'm 31 years old and I had the same job for 12 years. That's crazy. It's interesting. I don't know if you saw this week. I promise you I'm not making this up, but there was a Newsweek magazine article about millennials who are homeless, right? Okay, and you're supposed to feel sorry for us because they're homeless millennials. There are homeless millennials, and we should feel sorry for them. But what was interesting about the article is that it was talking about how millennials have hacked homelessness. Okay, so every single millennial that's homeless, like 96%, go read the article. I'm not making this up. They all have cell phones. They're homeless, but they have cell phones. They use Google Maps to navigate, and this is true. They have weather apps on their cell phone to tell them where to sleep at night. And some of them have actually created this web network where homeless people can all get together online and find out the best dumpsters with the best food in them. That's the millennial generation. Your generation is known for cracking the human genome. My generation is known for the selfie stick. Your generation is known for inventing the internet. My generation is known for destroying it with something called Facebook, okay? That's what we did. Everybody thought Facebook was cute, right? Until it became the largest IPO ever, right? And, which, by the way, you have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. You hate it because it's the only tech stock you ever bought, and it's nearly given you a heart attack 40,000 times. And you love it because it's the only way you know your children are alive, Cute, Facebook. That's what the presidents of Syria, Lebanon, or not Lebanon, maybe that's next, Libya, Egypt, all these countries thought that it was really, really cute until it sort of took over the world, right? You think about it. 1.3 billion people on Facebook. That makes Mark Zuckerberg the premier of the second largest country in the world. Isn't that crazy? It's actually a crazy, crazy world we're living in. I mean, it is an unbelievably turbulent time that we're living in. In fact, there's a certain irony to this, I think, because we have probably witnessed in the last decade or so some of the most significant times of change and turbulence, simultaneously. And by the way, the conflict of the time we're living in came upon us rather suddenly. I mean, in fact, we were coming into the 21st century in a moment of like the highest promise and the greatest prosperity and the greatest opportunity. We were coming into this moment, into this new century in a generally peaceful time. Things looked rather nice for us. And then 2 planes hit Twin Towers in New York City and erupted conflict on multiple continents. And a gigantic recession grabbed us by the neck and drug us to our knees. And terrorism has grown and grown and grown so that now our entire world is gripped by a terrorist group called ISIS, which is so awful they've been excommunicated by Al-Qaeda, which we thought was the worst thing that could happen. And that terrorist group now controls one piece of land between Iraq and Syria, larger than the United Kingdom, and in effect controls Libya, the entire northeast of Nigeria, large portions of other countries, like even parts of Egypt and Kenya, and large portions of Somalia. I mean, these are crazy times we're living in. Yet when I think at the beginning of the 21st century, there's a particular quote that comes to my mind, and it happens to be my favorite quote by Winston Churchill. And here's what the quote is. The quote is, "A great ship is sinking in a calm sea." See, and when Churchill said that, it was right at the end of World War II when Great Britain had been brought to its knees, and when he was specifically speaking about India. India was being lost by the British Empire, and it was all going very, very badly. And he, as only Churchill could do, stood and in just 7 or 8 words, he painted this incredible picture. A great ship is sinking in a calm sea. And it's that quote that I want to talk about for just a few minutes tonight. A great ship is sinking in a calm sea. Because the fact is that nations and corporations and individuals, we can never take times of peace and prosperity for granted. For life is filled with surprises, and we have this incredible capacity to sabotage ourselves in the calmest of seas. In some sense, we're all captains of our own individual ships, right? We're piloting our ships as we go into the end of the horizon. But see, we're not just captains of our own ship in this room. We're also leaders in this room. And where our ship goes, there's a whole group of ships that come behind us, and they're just looking at us to see what direction to go. And at the very, very beginning of the couple of days of meeting, I just want to take my moment here today to offer a few questions that I think we need to consider. A few very, very simple questions. In fact, the first question is so simple, you're probably going to put me on the side and you say, what does that kid know? And why is he asking us this? And why is he wasting our time with this very, very, very simple question? But actually, these 3 simple questions will keep our ship from sinking on a calm sea. They'll check our trajectory to make sure that we're not sabotaging ourselves. And here's the simple first question, which you might discount, but perhaps if you do, you might be in the most peril of us all. The question is, how healthy are you really? See, the life of a tree is directly related to its roots. See, the root is the most invisible part of the plant. But the root sustains life and it gives strength. And perhaps you know this, but it seems rather elementary perhaps, but do you know that if in certain trees, if a certain part of the root is bad, that certain parts of the leaves start failing and falling and dying? And the roots are the most invisible part of the tree. Maybe they only represent 20% of the tree. They're way down deep in there. There are all these distractions, right? They're the suits and the ties, and nobody really knows. But down deep in those roots Like in the great sequoia trees, right? They grow to 250 feet in the sky, and they take 80 to 100 gallons of water every single day. And it all comes to the roots. But if the roots aren't healthy, it could have all the water in the world underneath the ground, but it's not getting to the right place, and the tree dies. And it's a slow and a painful death. Because it's much easier to kill a root than it is to get it healthy again. You know, health is like holistic. That's what it is. It's not simplistic. It's holistic. You know, Jesus had this like funny moment where he was in the center of all these really, really smart people, these in synagogue, and these guys are trying to test him, and they ask him that question, you know, which is the greatest commandment, right? And Jesus gives a really, really simple answer. Every little Jewish boy could answer this question. And Jesus says, you got to love, Shema, you got to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. 4 different things. It's holistic. See, it's interesting how, as leaders, we have this real tendency to be objective with everyone else and everything else but ourselves. Right? I mean, we require health and excellence, and we have these high expectations for everyone else, but we're all too willing to let our own health go unchecked, and we often live out of balance, and we live out of focus, and health isn't easy. It's complicated. See, when Jesus said those 4 things, heart, soul, mind, and strength, he meant 4 distinct different things. You know, heart in the time period of Jesus, you know, the heart was the center of your decision making. That's where it was. It was the spoke and the will. And when you talked about your heart, that was where you decided things. You decided things. And so a simple way of assessing this is, you know, how healthy are your decisions? Are they reflecting your values? Are they decisions that preserve self-interest? You know, because one thing I've learned, you know, in my few years on planet Earth, is that there are 2 different value systems between the Bible and between the culture we live in. You know, Christianity is all about this word, self-sacrifice. This secular culture we're living in is all about a different word, self-preservation. And our decisions determine where our values are. And Jesus is saying to us tonight, I think through 2,000 years of history, through a very, very simple Bible verse and an even more simplistic question, like how healthy are you really in your decision making? Because a lot of times we can sit in our churches and in our groups and we can be committed. See, knowing something is true is different than believing it. Because believing it means you act upon it. And when you're a powerful person, and you sit at the top without anyone questioning you, except the occasional board meeting or something, then it's very, very easy in the isolation of power to make maybe the most expedient decision, but not the right one. And he says your soul, right? Your emotions. How healthy are you in your emotions? You know, and how healthy are you in your strength? Like, what are you investing your strength in? And how healthy are you in your mind, in your intellect? Not just in that you're not putting bad things in your mind, but are you investing your mind and in your intellect? As I'll tell you, if you're involved in some of the things I'm involved in the world, my friend Peter Greer that's here involved in around the world, one of the things we desperately need is good, smart thinking in some of these crises around the world. I happen to, at this very moment, be extremely involved in the crisis with ISIS in the Middle East. I have a book called Defying ISIS that is the number 10 Christian book in America today, and it's all about the preservation of Christianity in the place of its birth and in our own backyard. And those are really, really difficult questions. And if you love God with all of your mind, you view your mind as a gift to a hurt and broken world. You leverage that asset for the glory of God. How healthy are you really? Because if one area is out of whack, the rest will eventually be too. That's the first question. Here's the second one. Are you finding meaning in your vocation? And we've already heard a lot about this tonight, so I'm not gonna labor on the point. But this is a common question, in fact. But it's an old question, In fact, it's a very American question because when de Tocqueville came to the United States in the early 19th century and was traveling around America in the early 19th century, he wrote in 1830. He said, "There is this strange melancholy which haunts the inhabitants of this country in the midst of their abundance." And he continued by saying, and he thinks it comes from the incomplete joy of the world. Because you see, prosperity is never enough. And it is far easier to achieve prosperity than it is to achieve meaning. And it's really hard to achieve prosperity. See, meaning is what you're actually looking for when you think you're looking for prosperity. Meaning is what you're actually chasing after when you think you're chasing after whatever it is you've been working on your entire life. And there is nothing worse on planet Earth than finally getting to the place you always thought you wanted to be and discovering it left you more empty than you have ever felt before. You gotta have meaning. And I think a lot of times, though, when you come to a place like this and meet with people like this, and you're challenged, in this particular way, you think, oh, well, what I need to do is I need to leave my secular vocation and I need to get into full-time ministry, right? I mean, and that's actually the easy way out. And more typically than not, it's not God's will for someone like you. In fact, that is indicative of the secular sacred divide that non-religious people want to put religious people into. But actually, this isn't a secular and sacredly divided religion at all that we worship and that we celebrate. See, this word, like mission, that we're talking about meaning, is a much more complicated and precise word than we like to treat it. We think mission is just like telling the gospel of Jesus Christ to unsaved people. But it's actually a very, very different word than that. It includes that, but it doesn't just include that. And see, in fact, there was this moment in the early church in the book of 1 Corinthians where the church is booming and everybody's having a great time and everybody loves Jesus, and there is just this spirit of being a part of something extraordinary, and everyone wants to stop their vocation and become a full-time missionary like Paul. And Paul writes to the church at Corinth, each person ought to remain in the situation they were in when God called them. See, the word mission has almost nothing to do with vocational ministry. It's a word that means sent. And in the Bible, God actually sends people to do all kinds of things. Think about Joseph, right? What was Joseph? One of the things Joseph was sent to do. He was sent to save lives from a famine. What about Moses? Moses was like the worst preacher in the world. I mean, God had to put a circus show to get the guy to open his mouth. What did Joseph do? What did Moses do? Moses was sent to deliver oppressed and exploited people. That was what he was sent to do by God. And by the way, there are lots of ways of doing this, right? I mean, you might free oppressed and exploited people because you're a really, really fantastic international businessman, and you go into Haiti and you take the most broken nation on planet Earth and you create jobs, and these exploited and oppressed people see Jesus Christ through you, and you can't preach a sermon for the life of it, but you sure as anything can see economic opportunity, and you can create jobs like the blink of an eye. Maybe God sends you to do things like that. Elijah, he's a famous prophet, but he was sent to influence global international politics. I mean, just look at the stories outside of the church context. I mean, Jeremiah, he was sent to preach, but he was also sent to stand up to the powers of the time, right? He was a prophet in his own right. And Jesus, he preached. He certainly preached, but he also healed the sick. Jesus was as involved in healthcare in his own divine way as anybody. He had calluses on his hand. Most Christians have really soft hands and really calloused hearts, and it ought to be the exact opposite. Christians ought to have really soft hearts and really calloused hands. You read about Paul and Barnabas. Before Paul and Barnabas were missionaries, they made a collection in the church of Antioch because the church in Jerusalem was having a humanitarian crisis. And so they went to Jerusalem to provide financial and other assistance for a church enduring a famine. Titus, in the New Testament, he was sent because he was trustworthy. He was a great financial manager and administrator. So these churches were a mess. And so Titus was sent by God to be the church treasurer and to provide administrative assistance. Apollos was a skilled teacher. See, it's time we stop thinking about missions and in just a vocational ministry sense. We should think about mission and missions the way we think about science and sciences, right? God's called us to preach the gospel, but there are as many missions underneath that mission as there are people on planet Earth with things to do. And maybe, let me just conclude that by saying this. God forbid, if your mission is to be a businessman or a businesswoman for the glory of God, God forbid you stoop so low as to be a pastor. And God forbid if your mission is to be a pastor in that great mission of God, God forbid that you stoop so low as to just carry on the family business. Have you found the integration of meaning in your vocation? Last question, I'll speed through it because I'm running out of time. Do you have a current vision for your life? I told you these are simple questions, right? But do you have a current vision for your life? See, if we fail in this area, we fail for one of two reasons. We fail to have a vision because our vision is too small or because we tend to give up too easily. That's how we fail in this way. Let me start with the latter one. We give up too easily. See, this is a room that's full of smart people. You are well aware that life has its ups and its downs and its good times and its bad times. This is a room full of Christian people who know that God uses the bad times as much as he uses the good times. That God sometimes shapes us and more powerfully does so in the bad times than in the good times. But as I said a few moments ago, knowing something is true and believing it are two different things. And you must believe it's true. That if this is the worst moment of your career, and you're not here to get a little advice or a little, shot in the arm, you're here because you're just clawing. You just don't know what's going to happen. I would tell you, you're in the best place in the best moment because God still does remarkable, remarkable things. See, we believe that sometimes our greatest success is in the immediate aftermath of our greatest failure or our most difficult seasons, and our present situation is no prophecy of our future. See, as Christians, we have thousands of years of history that's filled with stories like this, like the story of a man who was trafficked as a slave into a foreign country and was reported back home as probably dead. Not a good start for Joseph, who became the prime minister of Egypt. Daniel was taken by an invader and was a despised minority under a tyrannical government, and it's a really, really unlikely place for a man to become the confidant of the emperor. And Esther was a sex slave, essentially. And she saved her entire nation with a little bit of courage and a whole lot of God's help. And all three of them, by the way, in the middle of pagan and secular societies, they did all of these things. Because life is oftentimes filled with more bad days than good days. And you don't measure a man or a woman by his talent or by his wealth as this world does, but you measure a man or a woman rather by what it takes to discourage him. And your present reality is no prediction of your future. Your current circumstances are not chains. They could be catalysts. They could be stepping stones. And success in life is often nothing more than moving from one failure to the next with undiminished enthusiasm. The fact is, there probably is somebody here tonight that needs to stop saying I can't and start saying I can, and stop saying I won't and start saying I will, because the history of our Christian movement is filled to the brim with people who didn't give up. And by the way, history period is filled with people like that. I mean, just think about history. I mean, how many elections did Abraham Lincoln lose? I think he lost 8. He failed in business twice. He had a broken relationship after broken relationship. One of his fiance died. Imagine losing 8 races before you became president of the United States. History's filled with these things. The Beatles being turned down because their type of music was going out. Michael Jordan cut from his high school basketball team. Thomas Edison told by a teacher he was too stupid to succeed at anything. Walt Disney fired from a paper because he lacked imagination. Some of you would have fired him. And then he would have invented Facebook. I mean, J.K. Rowling, right, a hero of my generation, she was on welfare when she wrote Harry Potter. My wife is Brazilian, and there's this Portuguese proverb, and when you translate it, it is, God writes straight even on wavy lines. And the other way, in conclusion, that we fail when it comes to vision is that we think too small. And one of my mentors, the guy who gave me a job when I was 18 years old, is the campus pastor for this school, Liberty, that at that time was maybe 25,000 students. And when I left, it was 120,000 students. And it had a $1.2 billion nest egg of cash reserves and of an endowment, and it had over 300 programs of study, including law, engineering, and medicine. My mentor, who gave me that job, which I later became senior vice president of the university, he founded one of the youngest executives in higher education in American history. He taught me this question to ask, and that is, ask yourself, what would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? Stop looking at what is happening in your life and start asking yourself what could happen, because God believes in us more than we think, and God's plan for us is bigger than we believe. And it's time we start living like we might be more important than we think we are. It's time we have the attitude of the prophet Isaiah, who said, "The Lord helps me, therefore I set my face like a flint." Or like the Apostle Peter, who wrote that God's divine power has given me every single thing I need in life. Or Paul in prison writing, "Hey guys, I want to send you the greetings of all of the saints in Rome, including those in Caesar's own household." See, it's time that we stop living like we worship a small God, and it's time we start living like we worship a God who parts Red Seas and raises dead people. It's time we worship a God that shuts the mouth of lions and makes pharaohs tremble and makes blind people see and lets lame people walk again. We worship a God that makes beauty out of situations that we would call ash, and he opens prison gates. We worship a God that takes fishermen and failures and the discounted and the disenfranchised, and he uses them to turn the world upside down. We worship a God that is incapable of a failing, and he's incapable of fear, and he cannot possibly lose. And it's time we take our rightful place, regardless of our vocations, into his kingdom as those who are following him with all of our hearts, souls, minds, and strength, wherever we are and whatever we do, in a world that is desperate for faith. It's time we stop living like God is doing us a favor, and we start living like he has welcomed us to his table. And every time we think too small or we give up too easily, we're insulting the one who has given us every single thing we could possibly need. God believes in you more than you think, and God's plan for you is bigger than you believe. And if not you, then who? And if not our generation, then when? Could it be that the best and most exciting part of your story begins now? God, we pray in the name of Jesus that you make that prayer from the Apostle Paul true in our lives. That you would do in us and that you would do through us. Things exceedingly abundantly above and beyond, not just what we've asked for, but far beyond what we have even been capable of imagining. In Jesus' name, amen.